Thank you, everyone. My name is Saeed Gordon with DOF Creations, and this is the first part of our three-part series for K-12 superintendents and district leadership regarding cybersecurity challenges within the education space. Today's presentation is the K-12 conundrum, the spread of cyber challenges and its impact on district leadership. Today's discussion is going to be a little bit more of a broad overview of some of the ways that cybersecurity has been changing, some of the ways that federal and state policies are responding or impacting some of those things going on in education and cybersecurity, as well as a little bit about the funding that's been impacting that. We're also going to highlight some of the things that can be done at the district level regarding preparedness, reviews, planning, and assessments, as well as the value of collaboration in that process. I have with me Carly Stepp, who's our Director of Outreach and Marketing for DOF Creations. And we also have my colleague, Viv Gordon, with us. She's got over 30 years experience within the IT space and has become a specialist at supporting technology challenges for school districts and across K-12. So with that, we're going to jump in now. If anybody has questions, feel free to jump in at our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So the big thing with cyber events isn't just that they're bad or that they happen. The impact is that it stops you from doing the thing that you set out to do. In this case of K-12, it's about teaching and learning. We've seen the number and the scale of cyber attacks over the last few years grow as it relates to K-12, becoming more and more frequent and having a lot bigger impact. The Government Accountability Office has stated that your range of downtime can be 3 days to 3 weeks, and your recovery time can be 2 to 9 months. So what we're seeing over the course of the last few years, and really since the pandemic in 2020, is that school districts are being targeted even more than they were before, which you were at probably in the top 2 as far as most targeted sectors back in 2019. But with the pandemic and the expansion of remote learning, remote working, of course, your staff on the remote working side and your students on the remote learning side, that creates, it puts you into both of those top 2 spaces for target audiences as far as bad actors and those who want to come after you. And of course, school districts are always a treasure trove of highly valuable information, whether that's payroll information or student social security numbers, what have you. The cybersecurity landscape has really changed, and what we used to see as kind of the stereotype of the hacker, the bad actor, that lone wolf in a dark room or in the basement who wants to, wreak havoc on somebody or try to push the limits of what they can do with with technology and their technical know-how. But over the last couple of years, schools and other organizations have started to see cybercrime organizations as their biggest opponent or those that are targeting them the most. We call this the Digital Mafia. These are highly structured, hierarchical, and organized institutions that work together to carry out these criminal endeavors, these criminal cyber attacks. They're often well-funded, spanning multiple countries and operating across various sectors. And with the FBI, CISA, and MSISAC, they've also issued warnings as it relates to the beginning of this school year and the expected increase in successful attacks and what to be prepared for. This digital mafia, as a collective, tends to have a certain specialization and focus on certain aspects of cybersecurity, as well as laundering and fraud, that they use not only to target organizations or target school districts, but also to reduce their risk of getting caught. Many districts are not going to be able to match the people power, the time, and the available dollars that these organizations have and are using to go after you. And that's a big part of what we're talking about today, is how can you utilize the resources, the personnel, and the people that you have within your district in order to better protect yourself. So as we're looking at these organizations, their specialization, members of the organization specializing in hacking, social engineering, and financial fraud. their use of technology. These organizations may utilize off-the-shelf resources, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But even for the off-the-shelf things they use, they're customizing them, they're adjusting them, they're tweaking them to their needs or to the particular organization they're trying to target. They're refining and fine-tuning their social engineering and their phishing strategies. And a strategy like data encryption or a method like data encryption to hold on to your information, to lock you out of your resources where they don't necessarily need to take anything from you, but they make it impossible for you to do what you need to do. They've developed an expertise and a specialized knowledge in those places as well. Cross-border operations, this is a big thing that we're seeing in hacking today, particularly when you're looking at state-backed entities, or you're looking at the organized criminal organizations, even those that are not state-backed. They're working from different countries. They're working all over the world, and they're working in places where, quite frankly, they might be a little bit outside the reach of our own government. And that all goes to our challenges in trying to prosecute them, which reduces some of the incentive there. If they know that they're going to be able to get away with it, even if they get caught, that just emboldens them and encourages them. In money laundering, again, that focus, that knowledge base there, and being able to make sure that if you send something to them, if you're trying to pay them off, you're not going to be able to track that down. It's going to take some of the best in the world to be able to track down where that dollar has gone to and who is now touching it. And collaboration. As we talked about at the top of this slide here, the people power. These organizations are willing to work together and collaborate across their organizations, across different criminal enterprises in order to try to target you and carry out really big attacks. They're not seeing you as an individual. They're just seeing a collective as far as, who is there and who they can take advantage of. That's one of the things that we talk about as far as collaboration within an organization, collaboration within a district. How can you put your heads together as a school district and use that as a part of your defense strategy? Knowing what's going on, knowing what the needs are of the people around you and the people within your organization, and then using that as a way to counter the collaborative efforts and the people power that these bad actors have on their side. Something that we had mentioned previously regarding the ability to customize ransomware and malware resources. This is the ability to buy basically a hack in a box as a subscription service. We're seeing cybercrime as a service now becoming a more prevalent issue, and that relates to malware. But of course, for most people, they're seeing and concerned about ransomware. And this affects ransomware in the same way. It's ransomware as a service. It's your ability to buy a bundle or a box effectively of ransomware resources so that you can carry out your own attack. This democratizes effectively that landscape. Now, instead of being one individual in a basement or a couple of cybercrime organizations, now it could be literally anybody. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody with technical knowledge who's someone that you need to be concerned about. This is that subscription-based model. And one of the unique elements of the subscription-based model of hacking is that everybody works as a partner affiliate, sort of like a multi-level marketing scheme. You're buying and bringing in resources, you're buying your inventory, and then you're able to sell that back out, and you get a portion of those sales. In this case, you're getting a portion of the funds received from a successful attack. And of course, this just makes it not just easier, but can also make it more popular. Some folks that may have never thought about going down this path, if they see that it's so easy to do it, it might encourage them to do that as well, which again adds on to the concerns and the efforts on the part of everybody on our side in the school districts to try to stay safe. One thing about the ransomware as a service is that it's also being used as an indicator of what's to come. So we've seen from recent research that there's been an increase in the use of ransomware as a service since the end of last year. We've seen that about 82% of the cyber crimes utilizing ransomware are utilizing ransomware scripts. And that ransomware script is basically just a copy or a code that can be utilized, copy paste by anybody to go out and create an effective cyber attack. But this also goes back to those folks as cybercrime organizations where they have the knowledge and the technical know-how to go out and customize their own stuff. So they can take something off the shelf rather than needing to create something from scratch and then tweak it and get it out there much faster, much easier, and unfortunately create many more problems for those of us on this side of things. So not only are bad actors continuing to introduce new strains, but again, they're upgrading, modifying, and reusing, which adds to complexity in regard to trying to stop those attacks, but also reduces the degree of difficulty for them to carry out those attacks. And of course, these things are being purchased through the dark web. Of course, the dark web has become a more well-known space within our internet as events like this become more and more common and also have a much bigger and negative impact on those around us. So after we've done the gloom and doom, the sky is falling, what are the things that are going to be available to you as an organization to reduce your risk and your exposure? Who in your district is holding the primary responsibility for your cybersecurity strategy? In most cases, and it makes sense, it's going to be your CIO, your IT director. You may also have your CISO or some other district level IT staff. But again, as we go back to the way that these organizations work, that they are an organization, a team, a collective, collaborating against you, how can we add a certain element of teamwork to cybersecurity practices and operations as a way to make sure that nobody is asked to defend the entire district by themselves? Even one department is not asked to defend the entire district by themselves. How can we work together in the way that we do things on a daily basis to try to put all of our heads together and to try to protect ourselves, because we are one district, or in this case, you are one district. So everybody working together for that goal, for that end. So some of the things that we've seen across the country, both at the state level and the federal level, are policies and regulations that are playing a part in not just an effort to encourage school districts and K-12 to make change in regard to cybersecurity, but also penalties that school districts and educational institutions face as well. Of course, most people in education are aware of FERPA and the challenges and requirements that that puts on educational institutions. You also have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and the requirements that come with that. Some of the other things that we'll see as well are civil suits. So an individual or a group as a class may go and sue the district in the event of a successful cyber attack, and then try to place penalties on that district as a consequence of the district getting breached. In the state of Florida, we've seen a couple of school districts have to pay out a significant amount of money over the course of 5 to 10 years because the district was breached, because they caught the breach late. There was not, again, the right alerting, communication, and planning across the district to be able to see these things quickly and to be able to respond to them quickly. And that exposure of the student records, I think it was over the course of maybe 3 years. That's why that time period to provide, I think it was credit monitoring and identity monitoring over the course of about a 5 to 10 year period was what penalty was put down by the courts. We also see at the national level, not just present or past regulations, but new ones. The K-12 Cybersecurity Act from the Biden administration speaks directly to an effort to push educational institutions in a positive direction as it relates to cyber hygiene, cybersecurity awareness, and a positive cyber culture as a way to try to reduce exposure and reduce positive outcomes for cyber actors or cyber criminals. We've seen at the state level where they're starting to push cyber insurance providers as a way to try to kind of have a trickle-down effect where the cyber insurance providers are facing new requirements, new challenges, and new penalties. And then they pass that responsibility down to the individual insureds or insured entities as a way to try to offset some of that responsibility on them. And I think that's on the part of legislators, I think that is not by accident. We've seen in this case, the increasing cyber insurance standards and requirements. This came down from the state of Tennessee. And in the state of Tennessee, they had to actually go and revamp their entire educate or technology model, excuse me. I think I had a small interruption there. I'm back now. The state of Tennessee was making sure that school districts were being required to address issues like endpoint protection, issues like their cyber insurance, or not cyber insurance, their incident response planning processes. And they could not get coverage without those resources. We've spoken to many districts who have felt that it has become almost impossible to get coverage now with the new requirements that cyber insurance providers have passed down. And some of those are internal policies that they're pushing out to their customers. But there are many other situations like the state of Tennessee where they are pushing down new policies onto the insurance providers, new requirements onto insurance providers, who are then pushing that down and passing that on to the insureds, and in this case, school districts. We also see in the state of Minnesota, new legislation proposing targeted ransomware vulnerabilities, or about addressing the targeting of ransomware vulnerabilities within educational institutions. That's about penalizing the bad actors, but also addressing certain vulnerabilities and easy to exploit issues within the K-12 system. And of course, there are always going to be certain things that you have to address. Something that we've seen is the utilization of devices that are kind of out there in the ether. Nobody's really paying attention to those, but those can create a vulnerability as well, like your printers, old laptops and tablets and things of that nature. So those are certain common challenges, and trying to create policy around that to address those better. And of course, ESSER funding. Much like FERPA, I'm sure district leadership is well aware of ESSER funding across K-12 and across the country. We've seen these policies and guidelines change quite a bit over the last couple of years, where technology was not necessarily a major priority, but it has become a major priority. And it is probably the top target and priority for the use of federal dollars right now as it relates to ESSER. And I'd probably go back to my colleague, Viv here. Viv, are you still with us?
I am.
Viv, can you give us a short overview of the school district you worked with in North Florida? I know you helped them to use ESSER dollars to boost their security monitoring across the district, as well as to address some communications issues for the teachers and some physical security projects too.
Sure. I'm glad before I even touch on that side, I'm glad you mentioned cybersecurity insurance. I have a school district that reached out to me yesterday. The cybersecurity insurance company will no longer support them unless they get in compliance with some sort of SIM product or or data management and backup restore. So we talked to them about having a SIM and the rubric product that we've been reviewing for some of the other districts. But I will review or give you an overview of what we did for one of the districts in North Florida. COVID was a major challenge to this district, as it was to most others. One of the issues that the district had was that the teachers were using their own phones, their cellular phones, to support the students and the parents. So using the ESSER funds, we were able to give them a VoIP phone system. We shored up their firewalls, their endpoint protection, and we did such a good job with that they asked us also to help with their networking, their wireless, and cameras. Just recently, this last month, we were able to give them, again using their ESSER dollars, a SIM product that ties into this presentation today.
Thanks, Viv. And I would also add to that, Viv has done a great job of helping school districts to understand with some of the policy changes. We've seen some folks that have been a bit hesitant or concerned about whether or not this use of funding is permissible because stuff has changed so much. She's done a great job of being able to provide them with the resources and the information they need to identify and determine what type of stuff is permissible, how this stuff has changed, and how these policies have changed to allow technology to become a bigger priority and a bigger target for ESSER dollars. In addition to ESSER funding, this is both a state and federal partnership in regard to funding, but the Department of Emergency Management at the state level has received funding from FEMA and Department of Homeland Security to utilize and support state level cybersecurity grants as well. Those specifically target cybersecurity, but the challenge we've seen with those is that they follow state specific guidelines. So we can't provide a particular guidance that applies across the board, state to state. We'll have to do that as a individual state assessment process. Say North Carolina, where we're working right now, they've just reissued their allocation that came from last year. They decided not to release it in 2022. They've now decided to release it in 2023. That deadline, I believe, is going to be April 30th. The state of Florida, by contrast, released the funding, then decided not to release it, then kind of did a slow rollout for it, and is now kind of repackaged it as a slightly different program covering a broad array of entities across the state. So every state is approaching this a little bit differently, but this is another bucket of funding available. For every state, it'll be available sometime in 2022, but you have to work with your individual departments of emergency management to determine what those specific requirements are and what that deadline is. Again, that's something that we work with quite a bit. But again, utilizing those resources at the state level, that's stuff that is going to be available to you directly, regardless of who you work with. So as we've talked about preparedness, we've kind of touched on it pretty regularly, but the goal of preparedness is empowering your IT team to write and implement policy. We saw in the state of Tennessee, there was a school district that suffered a breach, and the IT director in a kind of a closed session admitted that there were some things that he could have done differently, but he was concerned about it being a fight across the district in order to put them into effect. We've seen for some IT leaders, that has been a big concern for them, is if they're going to have to try to force people or drag people along, they don't want to cause that kind of tension in the district. Everybody's job is important, especially when you're talking about district leadership. Everybody has major goals they're trying to reach, whether those are teaching and learning goals, financial challenges, auditing and reporting requirements, a myriad of things that are important to keeping the doors open and getting work done day by day. But we have seen for IT, there are challenges as it relates to being able to adequately communicate what is required to ensure safety, and then making sure that everybody understands the value of this and also buys into these policies and changes. And again, going back to one of the purposes of today's conversation, trying to make other leaders within the district, helping them to be aware of what is going on, why these are valuable, and helping them to kind of understand their IT team's perspective in a way if maybe that team has not helped them along in that process yet. So it's not just about purchasing stuff, it's about what you do with that stuff. We can offer to sell you anything under the sun, but where cybersecurity is today, there is no single one-shot solution. There is no silver bullet. Even if you do buy a particular fancy technology, you're still going to need to do a lot of individual effort, whether that's from the IT team directly or across the district, to make sure that folks know what's going on, why access controls are what they are, who has access to certain things or why certain people don't, our planning process and our review process for incident response planning, the type of data we have, how we manage it. All of those things are going to require collaboration and communication across your district. And as I just mentioned, the incident response plan, do you have one and have you tested it? That's something that comes up a lot when we speak to districts. Even the districts that have one often haven't tested it. And there are some districts who have built one and just kind of stash it, especially for cyber insurance providers that have to show it, but there's no requirement to test that out. And sometimes there's so much going on that you just don't feel like you have time to. But it is incredibly important. You don't want to test your incident response plan for the first time on the day that you end up being breached. You want to test it out well in advance so you can make sure that the important stuff, like how you communicate the breach to, let's say, parents and students, how you communicate to other staff, who's the incident response team, who's made up there. If somebody's out of office, if somebody's sick, is there a backup in place? How do you respond and deal with some of those just everyday work challenges that may also become critical issues in the event that you're recovering from a cyber attack at the same time. So making sure that plan is comprehensive, making sure it's systematic, but also understanding how IT is vital to operations, data, and assets across the district and across your educational institution. Just saying that technology is important doesn't really explain how you as a district individually utilize technology every day. It's going to be the same for every district in some ways, but it's also going to be unique for every district in at least a few. And making sure that incident response plan and your planning efforts, whether it's something written on paper or just the way you review and identify your concerns and your resources, making sure that that is followed on a regular basis to help you to detect, contain, and mitigate different impacts as it relates to an incident. Making sure you identify the roles and responsibilities for all of the important people in the district and what's going to need to be done. But also, more than anything, knowing what it is that you have at stake, knowing what is available to you in order to respond quickly. And again, that may not be technology, that may be people, that may be state level resources. Almost every state has some type of contact resource in place to either help with preparation or to assist with remediation and recovery in the event of an attack. You know, do you know those names? Do you have the email addresses, the phone numbers, all of that? So an effective cybersecurity incident response plan is going to include a couple of things. Your incident identification and incident containment are two important areas. You want to be able to have resources in place that will help you to identify an attack. And we say this across cybersecurity quite a bit. Some folks may have tried to promise you that they could guarantee you'd be safe if you bought X, Y, or Z. I would hope nobody's doing that now. This landscape changes so frequently. It's one of those things where we prepare ourselves to respond rapidly. Anybody that works with us calls us and says, we got hit. We're prepared for that every day. We know how we're going to respond to that. And we hope that they know to call us immediately and never wait to call us. Nobody on our team would ever make a promise, you know, if we sell X or if we do Y, you're guaranteed to be safe. The state of cybersecurity today, regardless of the industry or sector, is just that. So having resources to help you identify a cybersecurity breach, if anything is to slip through the cracks, that is incredibly vital. You want to make sure that you're alerted immediately. You want to make sure that you get clear guidance as to what has occurred, where it is within your network, or what resources have become compromised. And then also having a path or a way to contain those things. We see it within email. It's called sandboxing. If there is an email that comes through that somebody clicks on that has some type of malicious content there, can you sandbox it? Can you quarantine it? Can you isolate it so that hopefully if there is anything negative that comes from it, its damage is minimal? And which also means you're probably not going to get taken down. If anything, maybe there are a couple of corrupted files. If you have a data disaster recovery plan and a backup solution in place, you just recover back from the older files and you keep it moving. So that's where your identification, which needs to be immediate, should work with your containment process, which should also be immediate. Incident analysis. This is a part of that recovery process. I think we highlighted on maybe the first or second slide that recovery can take anywhere from 2 months to 9 months. You need to know exactly what happened to you. You need to know what the cause was or the entry point of this attack, because without knowing that, you're never going to be able to ensure that you close up those holes, get better, and at the very least help to improve your chances of staying safe in the future. So that analysis process is really, really important in making sure that if something does happen, how do we recover from that and how do we protect ourselves going forward? And then incident response, communication, and reporting. So your response process is about, you know, like we mentioned, disaster recovery solutions, data backup processes. How are we going to be able to take anything that was damaged, that was encrypted, that was lost, and get it back? Disaster recovery is a major component, and cyber insurance providers have also made this a big requirement in that process as well. But making sure that you have a way to continue day-to-day operations. If someone says, we've encrypted this workload, we've encrypted this file, you don't have access to it. That's okay. It's already been encrypted. So we know that you are stopping our access to it, but you also can't do anything with it. And we have a backup. So we'll take the backup and keep on moving forward. Communication and reporting, of course, as I mentioned, your process of communicating with parents, staff, even law enforcement. Who manages that? How do you manage that? And how quickly can you get all of that work done? Those are incredibly important things to consider in the process of creating your incident response plan, testing and simulating what to do if there is an event or a cyber attack that occurs to you. And then plan maintenance. A big part of testing is seeing what doesn't work or what doesn't work anymore. If you have an incident response plan in place that's maybe 3 years old and 1 or 2 people have maybe left your district or retired, that incident response plan is not as impactful as it used to be. Not because the ideas in it aren't any good anymore, but because the people that you would call now aren't there. Do you have the right phone numbers in place? Have the personnel that's replaced, John or Tina, are they now in place to understand and go through these tests with you and know what their responsibilities are? And if all the people who are tested and have gone through this process and know what to do are maybe retired or maybe in new roles and don't know what to do in their new roles, is that going to be as helpful and effective as you need it to be? And as we continue to talk about that testing process and that planning process, this is about really making sure that you're having timely coordinated response, minimizing your disruption, getting back to a state of normalcy as soon as possible. As we talked about, I think on the first slide again, the time for recovery or the downtime, really, 3 days to 3 weeks. You could be anywhere from a few days to maybe even a whole month. We've seen districts that have been down, I believe it was a large district in South Florida that was down and had to delay the start of school by almost a month because of a cybersecurity attack. You want to make sure that you're not in that situation where you are potentially losing your semester, losing your school year, and needing to constantly readjust everything around, course content, planning, events, all of that type of stuff, because you're not able to recover quickly. So where do you want to begin? From us, we recommend the network and security assessment. And this can be sort of a broad array of things, but what network and security assessment means in this context is identifying how your network is being used to support your district. How is internet being used to support your district? Who is connected to your internet? We have a thing called segmentation within networking. You want to have a way where those who are not a part of the district are connecting to your network or using your internet in one way with limited access, meaning limited exposure if something were to occur. You also have folks that are a part of the district that are using or having access to your internet in a different way, but there also needs to be a certain level of monitoring and isolation in order to make sure that if somebody, let's say from accounting, is breached, they can't just go and get into records as well. We've seen that for some districts where there is so much availability and access to different aspects of district networking, district internet, that if you're in accounting and you're breached, that person can go into personnel files, student records, medical records, and get access to everything. That shouldn't happen, but that is also an element of how is your network set up, how is internet provided and internet utilized across your district. And then of course your security assessment, you can do that in a few ways. You can utilize a deep tissue penetration test where it's trying to break through doors, quote unquote, and seeing what that would look like and how that would work. You can also do it in a way where it's very targeted, where you identify certain things that are critical or vulnerable, and you want to make sure that you can strengthen your defenses. But you can also do kind of a surface level attack as well, and just see, basically knocking on doors, lifting up windows in a proverbial sense. What is exposed and how do I make sure that I reduce any exposure, at least from the outside looking in? I don't want to look like an easy target to anybody that's just passing by, so to speak. We're looking here at trying to determine, how are you going to catch dangerous activities? What resources do you have in place to address those or alert your team about those? How do you also reduce the risk of any unauthorized users just being able to gain access to things that they shouldn't? What alerting processes, what types of policies do you have in place to reduce that risk? And then you have your malicious and suspicious files. That happens a lot with phishing, with email usage. Do you have a process in place? Do you have resources in place to reduce the risk of, even if somebody does click on a dangerous file, that they're not being given too broad of access that it would cause great damage to the district, or that if they click on that, it's able to be quarantined, identified, and that risk cut off very, very quickly. And of course, for many of these things, you have the paid versions of these resources, which are often based on organizational size. Larger districts have larger costs, smaller districts have smaller costs, but there are also a lot of low stress and no cost versions of these assessments that you can use as your first kind of just getting an understanding or the lay of the land for your district and for your IT operations. Some of those that we utilize are the Fortinet CTAP, which is really great as a network and security tool. It helps you to identify some of the resources connected to your network, some of the resources that you use within your district that touch on the internet. Helps you to identify certain things that could be a vulnerability. We've done it in the past where folks didn't realize that printers had access to a certain aspect of their network, which if there was someone, let's say a bad actor who was able to see that, get in and take advantage of that accessibility, it could cause problems. So for no cost at all, your IT team is alerted to a vulnerability. They can easily change those policies, those rules, those requirements as it relates to the printers. So that way all that stuff is directed somewhere else and reduces your exposure. Again, it's not about creating some type of perfect solution and making empty promises. It's about reducing exposure as much as possible, but you have to know what's exposed in order to close up those gaps and reduce your exposure over time. The idea of defense in depth is something that we've kind of hinted at or highlighted throughout this discussion. Defense in depth is sort of the next evolution of cybersecurity. And I know for different people on the call, there may be different different levels of technical understanding. The concept of defense in depth may be something you talk about every day, or it may be something that's brand new for you. But defense in depth is about utilizing everything from technology to technical staff to non-technical staff as part of that collective effort to protect yourself against anything and everything that could come your way. It's about layering different resources together in order to help you to close as many gaps as possible from a technical sense. It's also about making sure that you and your team know what's going on so that you're not an easy target as it relates to phishing and social engineering, but also so that you know kind of why certain things need to work in the way they do, and you understand kind of what role you play in protecting yourself and protecting your district. So it's a very collaborative mesh and web of resources that you and your district will build together to cover all of your bases, but also evolve and grow over time, because as threats change, you'll have to change too. So a big part of defense in depth is with any aspect of IT today is identifying what you have, what's a critical asset, and how does that work? What are the things that are most important for your district day to day? Which applications? Email is obviously important. If email were to go down, would you be able to maintain, the work that you do as far as teaching and learning? What are the types of things that are most important to you and have the biggest impact on what you do as a district day by day? As we talked about those network assessments, security assessments, when you've done those risk assessments, what are you seeing as your vulnerabilities? What is the biggest area of concern? If this were to be targeted, how would we defend ourselves? Engineering a secure design, this relates more to very technical components of how you structure your access to the internet, how you structure your network. As I mentioned previously, the idea that somebody could just walk by and maybe open a door or open a window, that's the idea of not having certain things closed off, not having resources that have a certain layer of security on them that at the very least you have to log in to get somewhere. Anything that could just be easily accessed with a click of a mouse is a major concern. You also have the challenge of if somebody is in, anybody can have access to the same elements or complete access to your network. That's also a very big challenge. One of the ways that you can utilize, it's called access control. One of the ways you can utilize access control to protect yourself is that you can actually watch and see when somebody is trying to change the access or the things that they have access to. Somebody, again, in accounting is trying to get access to personnel files or student medical records. You can tell that something's going on where that person should not have access to those records. And the only reason they're trying to change their accesses on their own is because they're probably been compromised, and it's not that individual, not that person on your staff anymore doing it. It's a bad actor doing it. And that, again, is another way to provide you with an early warning system, allow you to quarantine, identify, and reduce your risk, reduce your exposure. And again, layering security, as we talked about this, defense in depth is really about that. It's about putting in different layers of security, whether that's a technology you're using, a policy or procedure you have, or the people you have in place that understand, kind of what you want to do and how you want everything to look, which helps you to kind of close as many gaps as you can. And then monitoring and analyzing your security events. As Viv mentioned, the SIM, that SIM is incredibly vital because that kind of becomes your one space to pull in all of your information. And we've seen the SIM as it's become a bigger challenge for folks now. Everybody wants to get one, but it's very challenging to figure out what model and what method of aggregating that information is actually going to work for you. You need to make sure it's going to be something where you can actually understand the alerts that are coming in, and you're not just having a whole bunch of information dumped on you, because you're monitoring, but you're not able to analyze. That's not really effective. So you're trying to find that right balance in regard to the technologies you use, the strategies and the policies you have, and being able to move forward there. It's in no way, shape, or form is this a small process. In no way, shape, or form is this, again, a silver bullet or one size fits all. It's everybody collaborating, working together, and everybody doing their part. You used to say about raising children, it takes a village. In regard to keeping your district or your organization safe, again, it takes a village. So that's what this process is about. Understanding some of the challenges that you as leadership are seeing in regard to cybersecurity, what we're seeing from district leadership as far as their concerns and what they want to do to keep themselves safe. And then how some of the evolution of IT, how those things are changing and evolving to better support you. So one thing that can be done is, again, that no cost assessment. Those resources are readily available. There's not really a concern on your side as far as how challenging or how big that would be if it's available at no cost to you. Some of the things you may want to determine, though, is if it's going to be valuable. We have seen for some folks that it kind of only tells them stuff they already know based on the types of security or network assessments they might have done in the past. If you're starting from scratch, it's a great starting point. If you're looking for something deep tissue, that may not be the way that you want to go. But again, just determining kind of what information that you have now, or what information you don't have. And then from there, you can determine which types of assessments, audits, and reviews are going to be a good place to start for you. Some of the partners that we work with here are CrowdStrike, Rubrik, Fortinet. That's just a couple of them. Rubrik is really a massive partner as it relates to disaster recovery. Viv, do you mind kind of highlighting what they're doing with the email backup solution? I think they're the only partner that supports email backups for Microsoft, correct?
No, I'm not the only partner, but Microsoft invested, I think, a few $1 billion into Rubrik to really shore up some of the gaps that Microsoft 365 had. So this is a true collaboration for Microsoft, and they've used Rubrik for that. It's not the only solution, but it is the one that Microsoft, of course, will endorse.
Okay, all right. And that's a really valuable tool there, because of course, as we said, if email goes down for most organizations, that's going to be an incredibly big challenge as far as supporting communications across your district or across any organization. CrowdStrike is a powerful tool as it relates to kind of that perimeter or that first line of defense, alerting, protection, isolation, but they also have resources available that help with recovery and being able to have resources on hand to help you out if something does occur. And Fortinet is just a really big partner, especially in the K-12 space, that covers stuff like security. They also support the phone systems. There's someone that Viv has worked with quite a bit, and they've helped quite a few of her districts as well. But again, that's just a couple of the partners we work with. We'll include some resources and links to our site that allow you to see the full breadth of what we've done with some folks and what resources might be available. So as a way to sum up, in regard to your next steps, your vendor partner should be helping you to complete these assessments. They should help you to create usable supports as we talk about monitoring and analysis. If you're getting assessments or if you're monitoring and you're not able to use the information that's there, it's almost like it wasn't helpful at all to do it. One other thing you want to do is try to grade the risk that you've discovered. You want to be able to put a grade from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, whatever scoring system would be used, but level of severity. Is this a critical resource? Are we protected, or are we doing anything to protect these critical resources? And if we're not doing enough, or if they're not secure enough and something were to occur, how big of an impact is this going to have on us? So being able to grade the level of risk and the level of concern you have also helps you to determine how protected, how secure, and how much you're currently doing to keep yourself safe. And then implementing the corrective measures that you want. That's incredibly important in the recovery process. We've seen folks from time to time, sometimes it can be very challenging to implement those changes, either because of time constraints, budget constraints. There are also times where it just becomes very challenging to implement changes if you feel like it's going to be a whole scale shift from the way things have been done. And sometimes that can be a bit of a daunting process. But again, your vendor partners should be the ones that help you to go through that and at least cut that down to size so it's not as big and it's not as scary. And this is my contact information here. We'll also make available Viv's contact information. But we're at DOF Creations, we measure success through service. Our goal is to make sure we understand what it is you're most worried about, what it is your goals are, and where you want to get to, and then helping you get there. We're helping you to address the things that you're most concerned about. So again, we measure success through service. Our goal is to be as helpful as we can be. And if we're not being helpful, that means that we didn't do it. So we're always focused on making sure that we support our customers in the best way possible, and that's defined by you and your needs. Carly, I think we had a couple of questions in the chat. Do you see those?
Yes, I do.
And what were those?
Let's see. So SolarWinds, the attack from 2021, I think it was. So that was a major state actor backed by Russia. Is there a strategy that you have for protecting yourself against hackers working for a whole country?
I think it would be the same approach that you'd want to use as if you were, concerned about other cyber criminals, or even, the lone, I guess we call them the lone wolves is what we call them. But any bad actor is looking for an easy way in. That's their starting point. I think the difference with the government-backed hackers is that they're either looking for certain types of information, certain types of entities, and that can really be the difference, is that if they're making a special attack plan and targeting you in that way, you're really going to have to utilize that concept of defense in depth and just trying to close up as many gaps, as many holes as possible. But generally speaking, your starting point is always going to be, do we have any paths to easy entry here? Is there anything that is obvious that we're not doing, and closing that up? At the very least, if you can make successfully hacking you a much harder prospect, that is a big step in making sure that you're just unappealing and not somebody that people want to go after.
Perfect. Okay. And then I know we had a few people interested in the ESSER funds or grants that can be used for technology. And I've heard about a COPS grant, but I don't know exactly how it works. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the COPS grant really quickly. Viv, if you don't mind discussing ESSER and how you've seen that change. But the COPS grant is one of the programs that's being used. That's not necessarily cybersecurity related. That's more about physical security. So the COPS grant is about providing better security on campus that can be used for surveillance cameras. I believe it can also be used for resource officers and physical security training materials, badge readers, that type of thing. So the COPS grant isn't exactly a cybersecurity program, but it's being used heavily in K-12 to assist with some of the other physical security concerns that school districts are seeing.
Okay, and also grants and these fundings are very fluid. So before I talk about ESSER, for Florida, the Senate Bill 150 just passed, where 42 million is available for physical security. That's not a lot in terms of the fact that you have, I think it's 67 districts in Florida, but I guess it's first come, first serve. So they will, whichever school districts go after that funding first, they will be eligible for those dollars. ESSA funding came about as a result of COVID. It has 3 tranches or 3 buckets. The first bucket expired last September 30th. The second bucket will expire this September 30th, and the final bucket expires next September 30th. It can be used for any and everything. It requires very little to get access to these dollars in Florida. So I've stressed to my customers that they utilize these funds, especially for the cyber requirements. We just did that, as we alluded to before, for one of the districts for SIM. We're also suggesting to a number of our other districts that they use these funds for backup recovery, storage, for their endpoint protection, and a lot of the solutions that were discussed earlier.
And Viv, I think somebody also dropped a question in the chat. They were asking if ESSER funds are available to private schools. I know for most states they are, but I think is there a different way that private schools
There's
receive
also
funding?
ESA, yes.
Okay, so they can get ESSER and they can get ESA, but it's also a state-specific program too.
Right.
Okay, all right. Carly, do we have anything else?
Yes, so I know superintendents are getting more involved with IT and wanting to be a part of that process. How can they understand what cybersecurity measures are currently in place to protect the school's network and data?
I think that would probably be a mix of the assessment process and the incident response planning process. Being able to have those planning discussions, setting their vision for what they need in an operational sense, but also being able to collaborate with their IT leadership to understand how those operational goals can be either impacted by IT or will impact IT. I think that's probably the best way to do that, is to kind of set their non-technical goals and then discuss with their IT teams kind of what those non-technical goals, what the impact of those non-technical goals are on IT and technology.
Great. And then I believe I have one last one. We didn't discuss disaster recovery very much. Can you point out where that fits in the planning process?
So we touched on disaster recovery, like with rubric and discussion of like data encryption and backups. But disaster recovery is really valuable in being able to make sure, even if something, not a non-cyber criminal related, but let's say, hurricane in Florida, tornado in another part of the country, anytime that your data might be at risk, might be damaged, the servers and resources that manage and store your data, you're going to want to have some type of backup in place, an additional copy in place. Organizations like Rubrik also add an extra layer of security to that, where they not only back up or create extra copies of your data, but they also help to encrypt it. So that means that if somebody were to stumble upon your data for some reason, or were to break through and get access to your data, they're not able to control it. They're not able to misuse it. They're not able to take it for their own means. It's encrypted based on what you want, and you have the key. Or if there's another provider, let's say a managed resource you're using, they would have the key for that. That process also includes additional layers of security, monitoring, and support that can be added into that depending on the provider you work with and all that type of stuff. But disaster recovery is really about having an additional copy of your information. You can add on the extra layer of security with the data encryption of your copies. And then if something were to occur, whether it's a natural disaster or cyber attack, you're able to go back, you're able to take that information, especially if you have it backed up on a regular cycle, like every day type of thing. You can take that information and basically use that as your starting from scratch or resetting process. That way you don't have to have the long interruption of trying to get access back to it. You can just start fresh, reset, use that data, use those copies of that data, and then go forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. I think I saw someone say that they had to head out soon, but I know we're getting to the end of our time here. Carly, Viv, was there anything that maybe I didn't touch on or that you guys wanted to touch on real quick?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Well, Carly, I appreciate your time. Viv, I appreciate your time too. And to everybody that attended, we thank you for joining us. We'll have the next two events. I believe it is, Carly, is it the 13th and the 20th?
Yes, it is.
So we'll have our next two events. Our next event will be focused on specifically on funding and some of those specific resources that can help to reshape technology for an organization. And our last event is actually going to be led by the CIO, Henry Martin, for Walton County Schools. His district actually jumped up to, I believe, top 3 in the state in regard to their academic performance, but technology has been a huge part of that. And he's going to speak about that technical and non-technical collaboration between himself, the superintendent, and other individuals in leadership, and how that's pushed the district forward. So everyone, I appreciate your time. Look forward to speaking to you again on our second event, and have a great weekend.